I believe this is the first time in quite a while where I was actually unhappy and unsatisfied about some of the game development decisions that we have seen in Looking Waves primarily over the last three updates. I would say about maybe it started about 2.5 at the end of 2.5, then progressively got worse in 2.6, and then we have 2.7. Now I think we've all heard and we've all seen that the ending of Rina Theta wasn't really supposed to be done in the way it was done in this update. At the end, during the final boss battle, Rover, the player us, was meant to fight alongside 13 of other resonators at the same time on the same screen, but apparently Core did run into some problems with the mobile optimization, and I think that's a direct quote from what I've seen and from what I've heard. Now, what is the specific problem? What was the specific problem? I do not exactly know, but I've heard and I found that they talked about memory primarily, memory issues, and that kind of made me think, okay, storage, probably not. RAM memory, probably not, but at the same time, that kind of made me a bit more suspicious on a memory leak issue that I have seen that started around 2.5 at the end of 2.5, definitely was there throughout 2.6. So I think they primarily had issue with a memory leak that made the game crash once it fully occupies the device memory. And I can kind of confirm that the game does have a memory leak issue because suddenly in 2.6, after a small update, the overall RAM usage on my 8 Elite did go up about 50% in some cases, from about 3 to 4 gigabytes to, in some cases, 8. I actually made a post about it. I think it was like 7.5, 8 gigabytes, which at the time, was quite surprising. At the time I thought that just because of my configuration that I added, but after further tampering and after further checking, it's actually not because of the configuration, but because of a memory leak. The game kept just eating more and more and more memory. There is no justification for that as well, because the visuals and overall are still roughly the same, although there have been some small adjustments, but none of the improvements do justify a huge RAM usage increasement just like that. And of course, that post made players go and say, oh, just turn off the servers for the mobile version of the game. Now, I hate to say this, but turning off support for mobile isn't really going to solve the problems, because it's not just mobile that has bugs and issues. PC also has stuttering issues. It doesn't matter what hardware you have. I've seen some of the top of the line hardware have stuttering issues, especially when Septimal was released. That's when things start to go bad, I would say. Even on some of the highest end AMD CPUs, on the highest end GPUs, way above the system requirement recommendation. I've seen some very, very bad FPS and some stuttering. So the hardware, mobile hardware, is not the problem. The game's system requirements are generally okay, and based on the visuals and all that, the system requirements are mostly accurate, I would say. But the main issue that the game has, and it's just a fact based on the testing, based on all the testing I've done in this video, in the last year of testing this game, the main issue isn't the hardware, it's the software, it's the game's optimization, the inefficient rendering, the outdated old API that the game to this very day is still primarily using for the vast majority of devices. That's the main issue. Now, when it comes to API, I'll talk about that in this video a bit more in depth, because they have changed a lot of things. It's actually a bit more difficult to get Vulkan running on all the chipsets, because I don't know, they decided to make it different, to make it difficult, more difficult. But I want just to mention before we start to go into the tests. At best, for a system requirement on mobile, any medium range, mid-range or high-end device from the last like 4-5 years should comfortably run the game at 40-60 FPS on medium-high without a problem. Most Today I'll be doing the test on the 8th Gen 2, which is 3 years old, by the way. So most of the mid-range devices, upper and even mid-range devices nowadays, do have a CPU that's on par or even more powerful than the 8th Gen 2, and does have a GPU that's about the same level as a 8th Gen 2 GPU, so hardware is really not the problem. I mean, Wuthering Waves, as you will see and as you could see in the last year of me testing, doesn't really use a lot of GPU. This is a very big misconception for this game. Because of the way other tests are being done and performed, because of other tests don't show the frequencies, they don't show the real frequency of the GPU or the CPU, a lot of players do believe that this game eats everything. It eats everything that you have in your device, which is not true, which is actually false. The game doesn't use that much resources, that much GPU or CPU. On the GPU side of things, on a 3-year-old 8th Gen 2, the game does use about 20 to 50% of the GPU power of the full capacity. And as for the CPU, it does get about 50 to 70% in some instances as a peak usage. On average, it's 30-40%. So it is far, far, far from eating up all the resources. And all the issues that you could expect are not from the hardware, but again, from the software. So with that being said, I think it will be time to start with the test and just let the data and let the facts just speak for themselves. So the first part will be done in OpenGL, and then later on I will turn on Vulkan and I will also turn on the frame generation feature. And obviously I will have to show you how to turn on Vulkan and the frame generation feature on the older chipsets, because Kuro has changed some of the inner workings of the game, and you can't really use the old method. Actually, it is still applicable, but you have to put the commands in the right position. They have changed the way it works, I guess, and I personally find that to be a little bit annoying. But the most annoying part is that even once you turn on Vulkan, you used to have the option appear in the settings of the game. Even on officially unsupported devices, if you were to turn on Vulkan through the configuration file, the option would show in the settings. But sometime in 2.6 it was removed, and even once you force enable it through the configuration file, Vulkan will not show as a toggleable switch in the settings, which is very disappointing and at the same time I would say very counterproductive, because they did mention that they had issues with mobile optimization, whatever the actual problem that they stumbled upon was. But at the same time, they remove the API, the software part, that will help at optimizing the game, and it will help at making the game run much better and smoother and more efficient on mobile devices. So honestly, it's a very weird situation that they remove one of the single most important aspects of optimizing a game to actually run better, and then they complain about having issues with optimization. So that left me scratching my head, to be honest, that particular decision that I have seen, or maybe there is something else to it, but I don't really see any valid reason why they haven't added Vulkan to the device that actually would benefit from Vulkan. All the older generation chipsets would definitely benefit a lot, because Vulkan would utilize all cores of the CPU much better, it would utilize the GPU more, but most importantly, it would actually reduce the heat output by a huge amount. The difference in heat output on the 8th Gen 2 is actually shocking. Over 20, 30, even 40 degrees Celsius less heat on Vulkan. So honestly, very confusing that they decided to remove Vulkan. Even if you enable it, you can't really have the toggleable switch. That's, I would say, the biggest disappointment that I encountered so far in the last couple months, because I did expect a full-blown Vulkan official release on most of the chipsets that are currently readily available for the players that players use. So that's one thing that is a problem. within the game at the moment. 8 Elite can run OpenGL or Vulkan, it doesn't matter. The 8 Elite is just an insane chip, it's a monster, so it doesn't really matter what you use on the 8 Elite, but all the chipsets would benefit from it a lot more. And they locked Vulkan only for the highest end, so that's the weirdest decision that they've made in a while, I would say. From a performance standpoint, that's definitely a very weird decision. So here we are. Let me just quickly set up my preferred. I like to have the sharpness up, makes the screen nice and sharp. You hide the blurriness with the sharpness. So although I personally prefer to just increase the resolution and play in native resolution or above native resolution, but if you want to save on the FPS, I guess you should definitely use that sharpness feature in the global, I guess, filter list there. So currently we are at 59, 60 FPS, but in certain areas, since we are in OpenGL, we will have frame drops. Now, why do we have frame drops on OpenGL? Why are frame drops so often occurring on OpenGL? Well, you have to understand and know how OpenGL works. Primarily, the fact that OpenGL is pretty old. OpenGL doesn't have a good multi-core use, or to put it lightly, it doesn't utilize all the CPU cores efficiently. It actually uses specific cores at specific percentages at specific loads. Some of the CPU cores are mostly idle or underutilized, or the overall usage doesn't really, it's not really balanced, so to speak. And it doesn't really utilize the GPU much, because that OpenGL API comes from days where GPUs haven't been that advanced. Modern chipsets, modern devices, whether PC or mobile, have a decent enough beefy GPU, and most APIs should take advantage of it. If they don't, you have frame drops and stutter, and obviously extra heat. And speaking of heat, you might be wondering, okay, well, if the game is using like 3 CPU cores, and let's say randomly it uses all the 3 CPU cores at 100%, why would using 8 cores be much more efficient, and why would using 8 cores use less power? Actually, the power usage can vary, but the 3 cores that, let's say, draw 10 watts will heat up more because they will be running at a high frequency. The 8 cores will be running at a lower frequency in a, let's say, synchronized manner, so that all of them will have the same low frequency. They will also draw 10 watts, but they will not heat up as much because the overall load is equally distributed. And that's pretty much what I noticed on the 8 Elite. On the 8 Elite, on this game, the CPU tends to hit like 80-90 degrees Celsius, and it draws about 10 to 9 watts for that heat. But at the same time, a different game that I play does draw more power than Wuthering Waves, about 10, 11, sometimes 15 watts once I turn on ray tracing. But the overall heat output on the CPU never exceeds 65, sometimes hits 69 or 70, and same can be said for the GPU. It never really does go above that certain temperature value, despite actually drawing the equal amount of power or even more power than Wuthering Waves. So the way that the load is distributed on the system is actually very important for these mobile chips. Something that this game doesn't really do well, and again, a huge role on that is on the OpenGL, but at the same time, a huge role does play the optimization itself. It's no secret that this game isn't the most optimized game there is. Unfortunately, there was a time in the update version 2.3 or 4 until 2.5, the optimization was actually really good, I would say. Barely any heat, the performance was actually very high back then, and overall the game felt definitely more stable, both on PC, console and mobile, from my personal experience. Once Septimon was released, that's when I would say we have started to see a lot of issues. and those issues spiked in 2.6 a lot. I mean, the overall issue list in game in the news section of the game was loaded with problems, primarily on AMD cards. Even Nvidia cards had problems. There was just issues everywhere, and that's what I'm saying. This game doesn't have hardware issues. This game has software issues, optimization issues. The hardware is more than enough to run the game. The requirements for this game aren't really that high, and honestly, the requirements do match the visuals. I mean, this is not Cyberpunk with path traced mods. Okay, that's something that we have to accept. The official requirements for the game are okay. I would say they're accurate, but the game suffers from a lot of performance issues regarding optimization and inefficiency, primarily inefficiency. So that's one thing that Kuro should definitely be working at and working on. Having all these nice leaves and stuff, you know, effects are okay, are nice, look good, but honestly, I would prefer stability and performance. I think most of us would prefer if they spend more time actually making the game more optimized to run better. And when I say optimizing the game, I don't mean reducing the graphics, reducing stuff. I actually mean getting stuff to work properly first, and then adding extra stuff, and then adding extra graphics. I think they have had their priorities a little bit, you know, to the side there, and hopefully they will actually start to do the right thing here. You know, the extra effects and graphics are nice, but make the game more optimized first. Like, fix the code first. That's the main thing that needs to be done here. For all platforms, not just mobile, for PC, mobile, and console, all of the platforms share pretty much the same issues in one way or the other. Now, despite all that, and despite all the optimization issues that we are seeing, the frame rate overall isn't really too bad. You do see the occasional drop here and there, the occasional drop to like 40, 47. That's pretty much what we have been seeing on OpenGL for a very long time. Now, one thing I think, yeah, I forgot to use bypass charging, so yeah, let me go back and let me quickly retry the first two bosses. Now, usually I like to turn bypass charging because it does help the performance out a lot on the 8 Elite. It's actually recommended that you use bypass charging because the 8 Elite will refuse to actually go full speed unless you give it proper electricity. So that's why I usually go with bypass charging. I mean, the technology is given to us to be used, so I might as well use it. So that's at least my understanding for it. Now, I do have some controller issues, as you can see. I'm not doing this on purpose. My controller just refuses to move forward. But in any case, the temperature on the CPU is at 85, 83, which is pretty much what you can expect from the 8 Elite. It doesn't really go above that much. It's usually the maximum temperature that you can expect from the 8 Elite. On the CPU, 83 is about that number. The GPU is at 70, 73. Now, the way how I determine how much of the GPU is being utilized, you have to understand that Qualcomm GPUs do have different governors, different speeds to make things more easier to understand. You have different frequencies. Imagine the frequencies are gears on a car, right? You have on the car you have 6 gears, right? And you have obviously the speedometer or the tachometer and the rev meter. You can put in the first gear and floor it and go to 6000 RPM, right? You are pushing the car to 6000 RPM. In the first gear, you're hitting 20 km per hour or 30 km per hour, depending on the horsepower, obviously. But same thing on the GPU here. Each frequency is basically the gear, the gear number on the phone, and the percentage is how much of the gas is being given to it. The more frequency you have, the higher the gear number, the faster you'll go. Same thing on the Snapdragon GPU. Lower frequency, high loads, low speed, low overall total GPU load. High frequency, high load, the GPU is using most of its full capacity. If you see over 650 or 790 megahertz and 100%, that's the GPU going full speed. Same with a car. You put it in, you go from first to fifth to sixth, you are going 200 km per hour, 6000 RPM, you're going full speed, you're using all the horsepower. Same thing with the GPU in this case. And a lot of overall tests that I've seen do miss that part, especially with the frequency part, because most of the tests out there show only the load. They never show the frequency or the CPU frequency, GPU frequency. They never show that. But why they don't do that, I don't know. I have like 5 different theories. In any case, not showing the frequency is a huge mistake, because that leads to some very big misunderstandings, and it does lead to let's say a lot of misrepresented and misunderstood results in performance testing. Something that I try to avoid when I do the tests. That's why I have literally everything that's important shown on the screen here. With me, as I like to say, maximum transparency. I like to show everything, so that the viewer has all the information that they need at disposal, at display. That's just how I operate. I just want to show the truth, to be, to cut the story short. But in any case, let's go back to the performance testing here. So we are seeing 400 megahertz, 475 megahertz being used on the 8 Gen 2. That's about 40 to 50% of the total GPU load, which is pretty fine. Again, it's a decent utilization, decent load, and for 60 FPS, that's okay. Now, the frames do drop again because of the inefficiency of the OpenGL API. The CPU is actually more warm than the GPU. Again, you can blame optimization. I like to blame OpenGL for that, but in this case, it is a collaborative effort between OpenGL and poor optimization on Kuro's part. That's why we see the CPU actually being used more on this game. The GPU really doesn't do much. That's why you can bump up the resolution to like 4K and still get decent enough FPS because of the very low GPU usage that we see in Wuthering waves. Primarily why you can slap a crazy high resolution on mobile and still get good FPS. And I actually used that trick to make the game run smoother before Vulkan was actually officially added to the game, by increasing the resolution. And that's when you push the bottleneck from the CPU to the GPU. That's where you actually do some little trickery when it comes to performance. It actually does help a lot making the game run smoother, because a GPU bottleneck is going to be much more smoother than a CPU bottleneck. Something I learned from my 20+ year experience doing stuff with PCs. That's I applied the same theory on a mobile device, based on a theory that they're all running the same thing in about the same way. So, and that theory paid off. It seems to work, but it's been a bit easier nowadays because you can actually enable Vulkan through the configuration file. But overall, can I see 13 resonators fighting alongside the rover on this performance wheel? Obviously, yes. But that comes to the question, okay, if there is enough hardware left, and there is obviously more than enough CPU and GPU left. I mean, CPU's total load is about 40-50%. It does hover about 40-50%, which is okay. The load isn't too high. Again, we are not utilizing all the 8 cores. In OpenGL, you're utilizing 3-4 cores at most, and the load between the 4 cores isn't really allocated to be equal, and yeah, that's pretty much obviously going to prevent you from utilizing the whole CPU in this case. As for the GPU, the GPU is also being used about 50 total percent, or 50% total load, 50% of that. So there is definitely more than enough hardware left on the 8 Gen 2 to run the theorized 13 resonators fighting alongside the rover. Now I would expect the GPU load to be at about 90% in that case, and the FPS to be at 50, worst case 30, with the current optimization. So on the GPU side of things and on the CPU side of things, that doesn't seem to be a big issue. So I don't think that they had issues with the GPU or CPU. After all, you do have the nightmare tacit spawns, which do have a bunch of enemies spawn all at once and they all attack all at once. Yet we do see very little issues with, we do see almost no issues with those nightmare spawns or these nightmare tacit discord spawns. Which does put me to the memory side of things, RAM memory. I personally would actually say that the memory leak could potentially be the main cause of that, of the optimization issue that they say, because again, on the 8 Elite, I did have moments where the game would eat 8 gigabytes of RAM. Never done that before. There's nothing new added to justify that dramatic usage of RAM. The overall total CPU and GPU usage has been roughly about the same, I would say. The graphics of the game do look about the same on default, so again, I don't think that they've added anything to just eat 50% more RAM. But the memory leak is a valid concern, because at that many resonators and in that current part of the map, I would say yes, if they have a memory leak issue and if they couldn't fix it on time, then that is a problem that did prevent them from going with the original plan. So we will go and inspect that part a little bit later, because I would suspect that when they did a test that they've done it with Vulkan. I don't know with what phones they did make a test. I don't know what kind of testing phones they use. But I can kind of reverse engineer something out of the data that I have here, and I can kind of come to a conclusion on what they actually try to use for testing. Because any mid-range device from the last 3-4 years shouldn't have any issues with when I say mid-range device, we have to kind of have a general expectation of what the hardware can do. You can expect a very cheap device to run the game at a high frame rate or high settings. Players need to kind of know to understand the hardware, basically the same thing on PC. And if you do want to buy a device that's going to give you some decent performance, you kind of need to know what chip it is, what GPU it is, what kind of GPU performance you can get out of it. You need to understand the hardware a little bit. You can't just buy any phone and expect that it will run. You need to know the hardware, what the phone has inside of it. So that's one thing that also needs to be mentioned. But overall, I mean, I would say the performance is, despite how unoptimized we are currently, and despite on the OpenGL API, performance is more than playable. I wouldn't really notice the lower FPS moments that much unless I look at the FPS constantly. So you only notice the FPS drops if you look at the actual rendered FPS. Are we seeing the GPU being fully utilized? Well, 348 MHz is about what we see right now. That's far from actually utilizing the whole GPU. And it's not throttling, that's absolutely not throttling. I mean, you look at the 8 Elite, you will understand what I'm talking about when I say it's not throttling. We don't see any we don't see any throttling here. There is no sudden temperature drip, there is no sudden clock drip, there is no sudden odd thing like that happening. And we are definitely not anywhere near the throttling threshold for the 8th Gen 2. Now, you have to know that not all phones will have the same CPU throttling limit, although if it's the same chip, then the same rule should apply, unless the manufacturer actually did put a limit of their own. Samsung does that when they limit the CPU temperature to 70 degrees Celsius. That's why I like to use the performance modes, or in this case on the agent I disable the GOS, and you pretty much get the Qualcomm's default thermal management, which is on this chip on the 8th Gen 2 on 95 degrees Celsius. So that was the OpenGL test. Overall, I mean, it's OpenGL. It was playable, yes. Decent power overall for OpenGL. That's not bad performance, that's pretty decent. But for my taste, for my standards, wouldn't be satisfactory for me at least. Now, let's go and get Vulkan running. I said that they've done something odd with it, and you can't really enable it the same way that you used to enable it last time. Now I have this is my 8 Elite configuration here that I use on the 8 Elite, but I'm obviously not going to be crazy enough to run the same config on the 8 Gen 2, because this config is not going to run very well on the 8 Gen 2. Primarily because of the resolution, it is just way too high for this device. But in any case, I will use this config. I will remove all the unnecessary things, basically I will leave only the frame generation and Vulkan. That's the only thing that we want to test out here in this case. And that means all of these things here has to go. Now you have the device profile ini, and you have the engine ini. Some of the commands that used to work in the device profile ini work, and I would say in this case the device profile ini will be your primary ini configuration file, where you will enable or disable features, or should I say where you will be enabling or disabling Vulkan and frame generation. The frame generation feature used to be easily enabled from the engine ini with the r.afme.enable equals 1, and then the second one r.afme.kuro.enable equal 1. That's how you used to enable frame generation on not technically officially supported devices in Wuthering waves, but that's not working anymore. I was originally very angry because I actually thought that they removed it. I thought that they have soft locked it or hard locked it, and if they did that, I would be very mad right now. I would be very mad if they did artificially lock, even if you enable it through the configuration file, that it will be locked. But thankfully, so far, and at the moment at least, they haven't done that. However, the way to get it to work and the way to get it enabled is different. And I'll show you how to do that. I actually figured it out while recording. I actually again thought that I did do something and you can't use it anymore, but thankfully, with a little bit of reverse engineering things, as I like to say, I did get it to work. And the results will be very interesting and very funny. And again, I would actually ask Kuro to explain to me what exactly did they have a problem with optimization to not get it to work, because I'm honestly genuinely surprised and genuinely curious to know what exact optimization problem did they stumble upon. My bet is memory leak, because that's the only thing I personally found while testing that it was a legitimate performance problem. And you'll see what I'm talking about very soon with when I get the frame generation working and when I start with the Vulkan test. But first, now I did put the original code in, and usually back in the day that was more than enough to get it to work. You used to get the option, the toggleable option in the settings, and from there on you can decide whether you want it to be turned on or off, or you could do whatever. But first thing I noticed once I booted up the game, that little OpenGL icon in the corner should have been Vulkan already, should have blinked at least once, but it didn't. And I said to myself, okay, maybe the toggleable option is in the settings now, and I'll just turn it on from the settings. I'll reboot the game and recompile the shaders. We'll get it working. But I was in for a surprise for the first time. Now was optimistic. I usually am quite optimistic when it comes to these things because I make mistakes writing these things off all the time, and I understand I could make a typo and it will not work obviously if I do that, but I'm very sure I typed everything in. I double check things nowadays, and for what I could see, it was on spot. So I prepared myself to go in the settings to see whether I have the options there, but as we're about to find out, or as I spoiled it already, it's not there. Now, I did get ultra high options though, that's funny. I got ultra high settings, but I did not get the Vulkan toggle option and no frame generation toggle option. So, that means back to the drawing board, back to the configuration. That's obviously the game looks crystal clear and sharp, but yeah, not currently the point of what I'm doing here. So let's go back, and yeah, it's not there. I did scroll all the way down. It should be in the advanced tab, but it's missing. So okay, I said to myself, okay, let's go back to the drawing board. Let's go back to the lovely configuration file here, and let's actually inspect what's wrong here. No, of course, I will keep removing. Actually, my idea was maybe I did have something interfering with it. Maybe the extra commands that I have here, maybe they are actually the culprit for it. But it turns out that that's not the case. I will remove all the unnecessary commands and lines though, because again, I wanted pure Vulkan and pure frame generation in this case. However, since I was in a troubleshooting phase currently, I decided to go step by step and go step by step to see what's wrong. I immediately noticed OpenGL upon booting, so I immediately turn off the game, because you should see the Vulkan blink when you enable the game, whether it's fully booted or not. It should blink Vulkan and then OpenGL if it's Vulkan enabled. So I said, okay, let's remove. Let's actually try force enabling it. Swapping it from 1 to 0 should force enable Vulkan. It should tell the engine to use Vulkan once it's booting up, or should I say compile the game in Vulkan. I initially didn't want to do that. I wanted to have the option in the settings and then from the settings to turn it on, but this is the thing that I was pretty much unhappy about with the whole thing lately. It's going to work. Vulkan is going to be enabled, but you are not going to be able to get toggle option in the settings. So that's a step back from the previous versions where you did have the Vulkan toggle option actually appear in the settings. Once you enable it, it would show in the settings in the previous versions on the H and 2. In 2.7, it doesn't appear. It's in Vulkan now, as you can see in the corner. It did boot in Vulkan, but there is a little surprise waiting for us. As I already spoiled it, it's not going to appear in the settings. So this is just a friendly advice from someone who spent over a year testing all sorts of games, from someone who didn't only test Wuthering Waves but tested a lot of games. I tested a lot of OpenGL games, a lot of Vulkan games, space games, and in 100% of cases, Vulkan had better performance, better FPS, better thermals than OpenGL. Vulkan offered better graphics, less overall memory usage, less overall problems, less crashing than OpenGL. Removing Vulkan as official API on all the chipsets is a horrible move, and it's not going to benefit the player. Because, again, OpenGL is outdated and it simply is not going to take advantage of what these chips can do. Besides all the other problems that come along with it, the OpenGL is just cherry on top to get even more problems. Sure, compatibility, okay, but I'm fairly sure very few, if any, device out there will have issues with Vulkan. Even MediaTek actually has good drivers for Vulkan now, because I've seen some MediaTek devices, they're very good, and they get some decent performance with Vulkan, better performance than OpenGL. So even those chips that used to have bad Vulkan drivers are very good now. Even the mid-range you know, the older ones, they still have very good Vulkan performance. So, and let's say if they still have bad Vulkan drivers, the Mali GPUs, then just leave the option to have the Vulkan optional. Make the toggle option available. You don't have to force Vulkan. Make it available so that the player can choose whether to turn on or off. Forcefully removing it, even once you forcefully enable it like they done now, is not a good thing. That's what I'm trying to say. This is not a good thing for having this removed. Used to be here and used to work really well. We were all happy with it, with how it performed. Removing it is a bad thing, Kuro. Don't do that. Bring it back. Bring Vulkan back. Actually improve it. That's the right choice. That's the right thing that should be done. And again, that's coming from someone who's been testing these things, these games and these phones for years now, and I've tested a lot of games and I'll be testing them even more. So I don't know why they decide to just remove it. It's not a good thing, honestly. It's not. I'm not being. I'm just a worried player right now. Worried player for the community, for the player experience, and for the game itself. That's why I'm actually mentioning it, because I care. I actually do care. So we don't have the frame generation enabled yet. Okay, as I mentioned before, took me a while to actually figure out where I have to put the r.afme. Used to work only in the engine ini, but apparently that's not the case anymore. And as you can see, I'm still on the deleting spree here, actually, removing the unnecessary commands here. Now you can enable Vulkan through the engine ini or through the device profile ini. I personally prefer to enable it through the device profile ini because it seems to have a higher authority over the engine ini. Basically, the device profile ini seems to be telling the engine ini what to do. So I decided, you know what, I'll just keep the Vulkan in the device profile, although you can technically use the engine in for that, but I just like to use the device profile. It seems to be more effective and overall, from my experience, seems to work a lot better. We have still Vulkan, still running in Vulkan, which is actually a good thing. Means that the things I've written in the device profile ini configuration does take effect. So that's at least good. We are still in Vulkan, so let's see if we got AFME working. No, AFME is exclusive for Snapdragon and only from 8 Gen 1 and above. If you have an 870, for example, you can technically get the option to show in the settings, but it's not going to have any effect because the 870 doesn't have frame generation support. 8 Gen 1, 8 Gen 1 Plus, 8 Gen 2, 8 Gen 3, and 8 Elite have frame generation. Mali GPUs, the Dimensity GPUs, and the Exynos GPUs don't have any frame generation feature for now. I'm fairly sure they'll add it at one point, but they don't have that. This is something only that Snapdragons have. Ironically, I've had some of you guys telling me that you get frame generation on a Dimensity chipset and that it worked, so that's pretty hilarious, but I wouldn't really be turning on frame generation on a Mali GPU. I don't know what can happen, so you know, just be careful with that. I wouldn't be using this unless it's a 8 Gen 1 Plus and above GPU, or 8 Gen and above Snapdragon chipset. So we are still troubleshooting because I'm dead set on getting frame generation to work because I want to show you guys the potential of what a older generation chipset can get. And when I said only limited to like 8 plus, some 7 plus Snapdragon chipsets, 8S mid-range Snapdragon chipsets, the 8 series, high-end 7 series should also have the frame generation feature. They're all, after all, based on the 8 plus architecture, so they should also have the same option, and it should work on those chips as well. Did we get AFMES? Oh no, I baited myself with the frame rate. Alright, well, back to the configuration file. Again, I'm troubleshooting this in real time as recording. So it was a little bit annoying, admittedly, to find a solution to this, but honestly, at the end it was worth it. So now we have only the AFME over here, and that is the frame generation, the Adreno Frame Motion Engine shortcut, the short for AFME, or short AFME. Let's go back in the game and let's see. I decided to go this route, remove all the commands, all the lines, see if anything interferes, and then boot up the game, check the settings if it's enabled or disabled. Now let me get some water while the game is booting up. It's a little bit of a longer video, but honestly there's a lot of things that I need to show, so it has to be long. Okay, water in the system. Now I can think properly. Alright, so we have removed the last bit of unnecessary line in the engine ini, leaving only the AFME commands available or up there. So, was that enough to get the frame generation working? Well, based on the FPS that we see here, apparently not. And it's still not there. So at this moment I said to myself, okay, so the engine ini frame generation, you know, the lines there don't want to work. So what else can I do to trick the system? What else can I do to trick the engine and trick the overall configuration to get me the AFME option? Then I said to myself, okay, let's actually do something that I've never done before. Let's use the CVARs option in the device profile ini, and let's just add the r.afme equal 1 extension to it, and let's see what happens. Now I got this idea. After all, so far the device profile was very consistent with how well it worked. So let's actually do something like this. One CVAR option has been put in, and let me put the other one. CVARs equal r.afme that could enable equal 1, and that should technically work. Should be a CVARs option or shouldn't be, I don't know. I'm just pretty much just as I said before, doing some reverse engineering, as I like to call it, you know, just seeing what works and what doesn't work. That's one of the beautiful things about testing stuff like this, because you get to learn as you test. And I did say I want to learn how this works back a couple months ago. I did, so I decided to do this, to write things on my own. Alrighty then, so was that all it took to get that frame generation feature up and running? All you have to do in order to get the same things show up is basically just copy what I wrote there in the exact same spot, in the exact same way, and you will actually can help you. If you need help with the configuration, just ask in the comments. I'll just send the configuration file, not a big deal. I'll send it in the comments. You can just copy paste it inside of the ini file and it will just work. But the main question is, was my troubleshooting worth it? Did I actually get this to work and to show up in the settings now? Let's find out. And moment of truth, there's the frame generation. It's in the game now. Beautiful. However, the fun fact, you know, Vulkan is not there yet. The Vulkan doesn't show, but frame generation shows. Both are enabled through the device profiling, so they don't want you to use Vulkan on all the chipsets. Like, they really don't want you to do that. That's sad. That's really sad. But they do offer frame generation to show in the settings like that. So honestly, confusing and counterproductive. But here we are. Anyway, hello, 120 FPS on the 8th Gen 2. As we can see, it's fairly smooth. That's definitely damn smooth. Finally, you can take advantage of that GPU a little bit more. we are now using the GPU a lot more now. As you can see, the frequency is 550 MHz, which is definitely significantly higher from what we have seen before. The GPU overall frequency is higher, and obviously the power draw will be higher at the same time, but the FPS is doubled. After all, that's what frame generation is doing. You can turn it off or on, and you can see the GPU frequency take an impact. This is what I'm saying. This is what I'm pretty much saying why a game performance test needs to show the frequency. The overall total load on the lines there, as you can see, is roughly the same. It does still show like 80, 70, 100%, but the frequency is different and the FPS is also significantly different. I mean, doubled. So it makes zero sense that you have 80% GPU usage, you know, and then you turn on frame generation, which does push the GPU harder, but still shows 80%. You know, that's why I need to see frequency. Frequency is extremely important in order to have accurate information on what's happening. But first, in order to make the test follow the same routine that I usually do, we will do Vulkan 60 FPS, and then later on I will use Vulkan plus frame generation or 120 FPS, and then near the end I will also attempt to get OpenGL plus frame generation, but as you will see later on, that wouldn't really end well you will see. This is one thing I don't want to spoil because it's pretty funny. But yeah. So 60 FPS now overall. Since we do have a lot of other performance-related issues within the game, Vulkan is going to help a lot with performance. I mean, the heat output is already a lot lower, honestly. The heat output is already about 10. What is my controller doing? Lovely. Okay then, let's just go back to the game. That was awkward. Anyway, the overall heat output is significantly lower. You have to keep in mind that I didn't let the device cool off. I just went and booted up immediately and went playing again. But with Vulkan, even with how how unoptimized the game is, and even with all the rendering inefficiencies, Vulkan will still help with that quite a bit. Of course, one thing that I forgot to mention, once you switch APIs, you need to let the game kind of recompile the shaders again. If you don't let the game recompile the shaders, you will get stutters and you will get a lot of issues regarding the FPS. So usually what I do, which I did not do in this video, I changed to Vulkan. I turn on the game and then you can turn off the game, then turn on the game again, and then turn it off, and then again turn back on. It sounds weird, but once you do that, the overall performance does become better. Now, unfortunately, on the 8 Elite and on the other chips, that's much easier to do because you have the switch. On the 8 Elite and other official support Vulkan devices, you can just turn on and off the switch, and it turn off and on the game. On the other phones, you have to manually do it. So that is the annoying thing about not having the switch. So yeah, but it works. The solution works, and even with a little bit extra effort, you can still get that to work really well. Now, in combat, the overall frame rate is, in this particular section, I would say it's a bit more stable. Definitely feels a lot smoother, even though I'm trying to focus on the fight here. Yeah, definitely a bit smoother. The GPU is being utilized a lot more now, which is, after all, the whole point of having Vulkan. I mean, the game is rendered so inefficiently in OpenGL that just by swapping to Vulkan, you get a lot of extra performance out of your device. Doesn't matter what device it is. Obviously, the higher end the device is, the more performance you'll get out of it, but overall, this should help out with the performance of the vast majority of devices out there. In general, this is a much more, I would say, much better FPS, much smoother experience than what we have seen with OpenGL. This is pretty much the magic of having all the 8 cores being equally utilized, hopefully equally utilized. I mean, one thing that it's a mystery to me is how Kuro thought that rendering on this game should be done. I mean, I don't know, it's the developer decisions in this game, you know. Sometimes they just leave my head, they just make my head hurt when I start to think about how many mistakes there are within the development of the game when it comes to the code. I would love to get a good look at the code myself. You know, I probably find a mistake or two myself, but I'll just leave that to the developers. I do trust them that much, you know. Well, that was relatively better, relatively smoother. The GPU again is going to get a lot more life out of it with Vulkan. You can see the frequency, lovely frequency going up. Yeah, it's pretty funny that you still get about the same performance that you see on the 8 Elite. It's funny, the 8 Gen 2 with Vulkan does give roughly about the same performance as a 8 Elite on OpenGL. I actually just felt that because I do have an 8 Elite as my primary device, and an OpenGL, it does somewhat look like that, although naturally the FPS is going to be more stable on the 8 Elite. That thing is double the power of the 8 Gen 2, so naturally you can expect overall better FPS, but it's close, honestly, it's pretty close. Okay, so let's turn on frame generation now and let's see what type of FPS and thermals we get on the 8 Gen 2 Vulkan API and frame generation enabled. That FPS jumped very quickly to 120 FPS. It is important that... Okay, well, never mind, actually. So, 100 FPS now, still better than 60 FPS, that's for sure. The GPU is still not fully utilized, which is odd, but okay. We're still in some decent FPS, in decent FPS range. We did see 615 MHz being used, which is, I think, the highest that we've seen so far. It's beautiful. Okay, that's much higher GPU usage, and at the same time much higher FPS, and overall a much more smoother and enjoyable experience. So I think that this kind of proves that the frame generation feature is being the fact that the frame generation feature is being locked is itself a bad thing. And one thing that is annoying is that only Qualcomm has developed a frame generation feature that utilizes the GPU, kind of like what Nvidia has or AMD has. Mali GPUs, Dimensity chipsets, Exynos chipsets need to implement this technology as well, I would say. And I'm not a big fan of that. I'm not a big fan of frame generation, but unfortunately, in this case, on these games, at this rate, we might actually even need that. I mean, not necessarily needing it in the sense of being, you know, mandatory to have it, but I think more of these chips should start to utilize all of the technologies at their disposal. And here we see what I was talking about, the memory leak issue. Now, I actually thought to myself, okay, these drops in FPS, you know, they have been quite odd, you know. no, there's not really a big reason to see those FPS drops. And based on the load on the CPU or GPU, it didn't really make much sense to drop frames. And then once my app started reloading, that's when it clicked. Memory leak. The device is shutting off programs in the background, which in result does actually affect the FPS by dropping the FPS and basically having the game wait for the device to load stuff from storage into the RAM. Memory leak does that because it will always ask for more and more, it will always fill the memory more and more. The phone will have to shut down apps in the background more and more. In result, that will create some frame drops, some dips, and that's pretty much maybe the reason why Kuro had these optimization, so-called optimization problems within the 2.7 at the very end of that story update, where with the final boss. That is a thing that I can confirm myself based on these tests. The GPU didn't give out. The GPU, even on 120 FPS, still has enough frequency left, enough load left, enough capacity left for more. The CPU is still about 50%, still has a lot more CPU left. So those two things are not the culprit behind any type of problem. However, reloading apps, as we did see, there was a problem. And that did directly affect performance, and that did make frames go down. In some cases, in some more severe cases, if you let the memory leak go on, it will eventually fill out the memory completely, and then once it can't fill more memory, once the device runs out of memory, the game will crash. And I can see that happen in that last scene, in that story update. So I'm fairly sure that was the issue. I'm personally fairly sure. I could be wrong, could be something else, but based on the tests, based on the evidence that I see here, based on the way the game performed, and based on the frame drops in that specific moment, yeah, I'm actually fairly sure that we're looking at a maybe even moderate to severe memory leak issue in some cases happening in the game on some devices. Perhaps it's limited to some devices, perhaps it's limited to some chips, and this is why I think Kuro should have been more specific when they mentioned optimization problems, because we are here just guessing what the problem could be. I can draw a conclusion based on the test as I do, but at the same time I could be wrong. And I would love to see a direct, a direct pinpoint issue to the problem of what they had stumbled upon. Now, I said I'll do OpenGL plus frame generation at the end, and this is a short one at the very end because it's not going to work really well. Frame generation and OpenGL don't seem to like each other. Besides the obvious visual glitches that we already noticed, the performance wasn't really all that great. I would actually say that the issues were a lot more persistent with OpenGL, with memory leak and stuff, with frame generation than with Vulkan. Now, I actually used to know a trick that you need to write in the engine init to kind of make the issue go away. But unfortunately, even after applying it, which I'm about to do here in a moment, even after attempting to apply the fix to the issue, the problem is still there. So either I have to do the CVARS option for it in the device profiling, which will be pretty funny, because that would mean I have to migrate a lot of engine ini commands to the device profile ini configuration file in order to get things to work. That's one thing that I have to do. I have to try out actually to see if that may solve some of the problems, or if that may actually enable some of the other hidden settings that the game maybe has. I don't know, I mean, there is still a lot of things to do, but this just kind of gives me a general idea what they have been doing in the background there. So, did that fix the visual glitches with frame generation and OpenGL? Well, as I already kind of spoiled it, it didn't. So yeah, it's not a good idea to have frame generation plus Vulkan. If you want to use frame generation feature, then I would definitely say, based on what I'm seeing here, use frame generation plus Vulkan. After all, you will get better performance than frame generation plus OpenGL, and overall much better thermals. So I feel like this is a win-win in this case, because you do get to use the better, more powerful API, and you do get to enjoy higher frames. I mean, any frame rate is better than 60 FPS if you get the chance to actually do it on that. It's going to be much better experience. So let's play around with this a little bit, even though I'm already and also flashing warning. The screen is about to be very flashy, so flash warning in case if you have issues with flashing images. Yeah, better to look away, because things are about to be flashy here because of the visual bugs and glitches. But yeah, we are coming to a end to this test. I decided to be a bit more this test to be a bit more longer than usual, I think, primarily because I wanted to cover all of the things. I want to talk about all of the ongoing current problems, and kind of to give an explanation and a throughout test, so that we all have some good data to look at: the temperatures, the frequencies, the load, the usages, everything. Everything is kind of displayed on screen here. So useful information, absolutely. And overall, am I going to be continuing testing? Obviously, I mean, I have to continue testing, especially after the supposed ongoing issues that we have apparently in the game, or that developers have encountered. I'm doing just my job as just someone who likes the game. I'll do whatever I can to help the game out, to help the community out, to help the developers out. And if this is the least I can do, the least I can do is just do a test, give data, give statistics, give numbers, and give my own opinion, my experience. I think that's fair, honestly. I think that's pretty fair, a fair thing to do. So with that being said, we are nearing the end of this test. Overall, I wouldn't really say that the hardware, as I mentioned that before, hardware isn't a problem. The hardware performance, the supposed mobile limitations are not a problem here. I mean, I've literally played PC games on my phone, emulating them, and without a problem, even in 4K in some cases, on higher settings. So hardware is absolutely not a problem here. Optimization, though, yes. Optimization, memory leak issues, that needs to be taken a look at. That needs to be taken care of, I guess. Just my experience from what we have seen here. And well, with that being said, if you have any questions, if you have any other feedback that you have regarding performance of this game, then feel free to tell me that in the comments down below. And as always, thank you for watching. If you would like to support me, feel free to like and subscribe. And with that being said, stay safe, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.